Thank you so much, Gretchen, and thank you, Pernilla, and just thank you for the kind invitation to be here today. I think it's such an important initiative, and I'm very honored to be a part of it. So, without any further ado, I thought we would go straight to the talk. And can you see my slides okay?
Yes, it's all clear
Yes.
and good.
Wonderful. Very, very good. Specifically talking about the ERC grants. And let me see here. Maybe that might just turn this guy as well. So there are different types of ERC grants. I think that for this audience, you'll mainly be focusing on the starting grant, which is 1.5 million, and you can ask for another 500,000 for equipment, and that stretches over 5 years. You can apply for this grant 2 to 7 years post PhD, and you basically need to have one important publication, ideally as first author and co-corresponding or corresponding, even if you can. Then there's a consolidator grant that's a little bit bigger, and then you apply for 7 to 12 years post PhD, and then there's the advanced grants, but I won't really be speaking about those today. And all of my slides will be available after the talk and with the links to the sources where I got this information. Since the first thing that we can note about these grants, as virtually every other grant, is that it's time dependent when you can apply for them. It's important to consider the parental leave extension for this specific funding agency. So this varies depending on whatever grant you're applying for and from which country. But for the ERC, they have kind of made a rule that women get 18 months extension of their academic age per child, whereas men receive documented time off. And because you're applying for these grants after your postdoc, this affects a lot of people because you're generally in your late 30s or early 40s and starting a family. So please consider this, and then you have to do the math and see if you qualify. So I thought, first of all, we can go over the structure of an ERC proposal. And basically, there's the part A, which is administrative forms. And I won't go through those in great details today, but this is basically the budget and the ethics and all of the general information. I would suggest that you start with this well ahead of time as not to take away attention from your important grant application when you are writing it. Because here, for instance, you need a lot of annexes. It's a big document. So your PhD certificate is perhaps simple, but as an example, if you're a man applying and you want extension for childcare leave, you have to have those forms, and that can take a while to get. Then there's the Part BA, which is submitted as a single PDF document. And this contains an extended synopsis, your CV, and track records. Then there's part B2, which is a state-of-the-art and objective section, followed by methodology and resources. And I take a moment to line this up because the most questions I get has to do with the fact that people think that the extended synopsis and part B2 in its entirety are very similar. And I can only agree. These are sort of, if you will, a short versus long version of your project proposal. And if there's one advice that I can give you here today, if you don't remember anything else, I would advise you to please avoid copy pasting between these two sections. I know that you're writing the same thing twice, but I have both applied for the ERC twice, I've gotten it once, and I've reviewed for the ERC. And I can tell you from my humble experience that when you read other people's ERCs, it's very, very annoying if the Part B1 synopsis is basically copy paste of the Part B2. Because as a reviewer, you first read one and then the other, and I'll go through this in detail with you guys so you see when the people read what. But if you've already read something, you don't really want to read it again, or you were very excited about the wonderful synopsis in the Part B1 and you want to read more in the Part B2, and then it's not great if there's copy paste. So that's like a very, very critical thing, in my opinion. So the next step I'm going to move on to is to talk a little bit about how these are evaluated, because that makes it's very, very important for how you write the grant. So the part B1 is evaluated in what's called step one and step two, whereas the part B2 is not evaluated in step one, but only in step two. And so if you bear with me for 5 minutes, I'm going to take you through this step by step and try and explain this. So by understanding the evaluation process, it indirectly impacts how you write your proposal. So that's why I'm spending the bulk of my talk today explaining this. And then in the end, I'll have some generic kind of advice on how to design your project. But I think that the evaluation process is very important. So it all starts off with a panel chair meeting, which takes place 10 days after submission. This contains the chair and the president, and they discuss and they distribute the grants to panel members. The B1 only then goes out in the first remote phase. And this is where 4 panel members receive your B1. And the focus of their assessment at this stage is only feasibility. They give your B1 a score from 1 to 5, and you'll never see the score, but it's used extensively by the panel to determine or to rank internally the different grants. So here I would like to just emphasize that each panel member gets about 20 to 45 grants to read. There's quite a lot. So if you want to make them happy, you want to make their job easy. So please try not to overload each page. I think the page less is more, sort of, I would say. And also look over the evaluation criteria, because these panel members are basically sitting with a sheet of paper that they have to fill in, and they need to kind of like tick it off and fill in the boxes. And these are readily available online, so you can just read them while you're writing, so that you can tick off their list, so to speak. And importantly, you will receive this tick off list, if you will, as feedback if you get a B or a C score. And I'm going to explain in a minute what that means. But let's say you wrote a fantastic B1 and you get back to the panel meeting, which is the next step. You will get an A or a B or C score at the collective discussion. This is the stage where the panel members agree on the external reviewers that should be reviewing your full grant proposal, and this is only for the A scores. So if you wrote a fantastic B1 and you ranked high, you get an A, and then you proceed, and then your grant is sent out into the next remote phase. Now, what's important to remember is that this is the first time a real specialist in your field sees your grant. So the external reviewers, these 3 to 12 external reviewers, they are the experts. They will first receive only your abstract and be asked if they feel that they are competent or to review your grant, and or if they have time, of course. Without any other details. So that's why it's really important, as always, to make sure that your abstract is really, really stellar. They then accept or decline the invitation, and they will write a report. And if, well, you have obviously gotten this far now, so you will receive this as feedback in the end, whether or not you get the grant. So that's very, very helpful. Then these external reviewers plus the original 4 panel members now get both B1 and B2. So this is why it's important that the B1 is really interesting and kind of shows feasibility, but also like sparks an interest. It's important that your abstract is short and concise, and also here sparks an interest, because you want really good external reviewers. But then again, it's important that the B1 and the B2 are, they have a red thread, of course, but that they're not copy paste, basically, because this is where you want to really show off in the B2 everything that you had planned. And to highlight here, the focus of the second remote phase is your methodology and your actual plan, whereas the focus in the first remote phase is feasibility. Okay, so it's a different way to think about it, if you will. The next step, which is called the interview step or the second panel meeting, is a step where you get an A or a B score. So you're invited down to Brussels, or I know that for the Consolidator grant, I think last year they had online interviews, and then you're ranked again. So then you get an A or a B. But please note that this B score is not the same as this B score, and this will be important in a minute. So everyone here is already an A, but then you can have an AA or an AB. And even if you get an AA, please remember that only about 50% of these actually get funded. But there are not a lot of national schemes that promote the ERC starting grant AA grants and will fund them anyways. So it's never a waste to apply. You should always apply. You might be able to get funding anyways. But so I know that this is a little bit tricky, but again, you'll get this recording again, you'll get my slides again, all this information is available online. So just try to think through it, because this is kind of how it's done and what you want to understand about the evaluation process to see how you should write your proposal. And I'm also going to come back to the fact that these are different feedback documents that I found tremendously valuable because I applied 2 times. So going then to my personal preference on how to write this ERC, I think that it's very nice to start with the B2, which is the full proposal. This is where you should apply plenty of details and all of the preliminary data that you can afford. Then I like to go back and do the B1, which is the research synopsis. And again, here I've highlighted, don't copy paste between them. It's write again, it's much nicer. Here you want to have some preliminary data as well, but not too much. You don't want to overwhelm the reviewer. And also try and avoid using the exact same graphs, because that's kind of like a waste of space. You want to have enough to show. In the B1, it's important to remember that you need to really sell your story so that it gets all the way. Make the reviewers want to read more in your B2. The other parts of the B1, your CV and your track record, please remember that these are standard forms that the ERC provides to you. I would recommend using their templates, but you can do them months before the deadline so that they don't have to take up any time for you in the end. And that goes for the administrative forms as well. So do them before, because it's quite a lot, and you don't want to be boggled down with that when you're doing your interesting research proposal. Another thing here to discuss a little bit is the evaluation process, the fact that it's a 2-step process. And I know that I've mentioned this, but I'll do a little repetition because it has to do when you're thinking strategically about when you should apply for this grant. So as you see in this cartoon, you have the step 1 with the panel meeting, and you can get a score B or a C, then you weren't quite ready yet, but you will get feedback. If you get from the step 1 B1 assessment score A, you will also get feedback, this form, but you will progress to step 2. And then you go to an interview, and then you're ranked again as an AA or an AB. And this generates a different set of feedback. So lots and lots of feedback here. And this is important because if you get a B score here, you have a 1-year timeout, because the ERC will say that you're not quite ready yet, and we don't want to waste our time. So you're going to have to set 1 year out because you need to mature a little bit, and then you can apply again. If you get a C score, however, you have a 2-year timeout. So the key to the ERC is to make sure that even if you get a C, you're not out of time, so to speak, for this in the starting grant 2 to 7 year timeline. But if you get an AA or an AB, you can resubmit anytime the next year. So this can sometimes be a little bit confusing as well. So I thought that to try and make it more pedagogical, I'll show you how I did it, my personal EU funding timetable, if you will, just as an example. So I did my PhD in December of 2011. So that's the beginning of my academic age. And here you can see how I'm getting older and older and hopefully wiser as well. One thing that was very fortunate for me is that I had a Marie Curie funding for my postdoc. If you have time to secure that, that would be fantastic because it's in the same EU scheme, if you will. So I think that it's considered beneficial. There are many other types of postdocs grants that are equally nice, but just because it's the same grant funding agency, I think it's beneficial for the ERC specifically. Anyways, so between 2 and 7 years post PhD, I was eligible to apply for the ERC starting grant. I took my first workshop, just like you guys are doing, 1 year before this. So I found a workshop that was really nice in 2012. And that's when I had my first introduction to the ERC. And I don't know about you guys, but I felt that it was so big and so complicated and I was a little bit daunted, but I learned a lot from this workshop. And I started to do the math. So that's why I've spent so much of my time to explain the evaluation process and how to calculate the years, because for me, that was really important. So I did my first ERC application in 2015. And I knew that I wasn't quite ready at this time, but I also knew that even if I got a C grade, I wouldn't be too old to apply again. So very important. So in this application, I got a B grade, meaning that they thought that whatever my CV, my proposal, something wasn't quite mature yet. And I would agree with that actually. And I had a 1 year timeout. But there was a huge benefit from trying out the system first. I learned the system. I formatted my CVs in accordance with what they wanted. And most importantly, I got 4 very, very helpful reviews that kind of told me exactly what I needed to improve. I then participated in a workshop 2017, and it was possible for me to resubmit then, but this time I waited because I already had all of the information that I wanted. And then I did my second application at the very end of my academic age that it was allowed in 2018. And I got it. And then I was awarded it here. So it's a 5 year grant, but I get 24 months extension because I was on parental leave. And now the math starts all over again. So this is where I'm eligible to apply for an ERC Consolidator grant. It's 7 to 12 years post PhD, plus 3 years because I have 2 kids. So that means I can apply up until 2026. I will plan to attend another workshop there for next year. I hopefully will submit in 2025 because I think I'll be ready. I'll see. And then I have time for one backup submission, assuming that I get an AA or an AB. Good. So that was my personal funding timetable. So if I were you, I would start with just calculate your academic age and see how you can go about this. How much time should you invest and is it worth it? This is a very common question. And my thoughts is that, yeah, it's difficult, but you should try. It's never a waste to apply for a grant and you can always reuse it for something else. The success rate for the ERC is about 14.4%, but I think that you should definitely give it a go if you want. And to answer the question of how much time it took, this is the time that I invested. So the workshops are only a couple of days. This first application, I spent a month and it wasn't enough. The second application, I spent 1 month, but I had lots of stuff already done. The interview prep was a month. The interview and the travel was 2 days. So I would say all in all, maybe 3 months. Spend a lot of time, I would advise, on your interview prep. When you read my slides later, because I can see that I'm running low on time here, I would go through this list and just kind of think about the interview a little bit, how to get lots of feedback from your colleagues and practice that and whatnot. So before we wrap up, let's just mention your project like for 1 second. Designing your ERC project. An ERC does not fund continuous work, so you have to make sure your project is new. It should be substantial work packages corresponding to 5 years with good funding. Don't be shy, but demonstrate feasibility. Then I would just go through the ERC website and find the buzzwords. You can see them here. It's very hip and whatever with scientific impact right now, something you have to mention. The one thing I get most questions about is the concept of high risk versus high gain. Here I would say that yes, this is a high risk, high gain grant agency. There should be some element of risk, but feasibility is also a criteria, or you won't get past B1. So consider that. Advice I was given after I got the grant is that the panel generally considers it not to be a problem if an aim fails. And indeed, most ERC awardees will fail in implementing at least one of their aims. But we must be able to demonstrate that you can handle the fallout. So risk assessments are critical in my opinion, both in B1 and B2. And with that, to summarize my talk here today, I would first of all advise you to start early as you can. Attend a workshop or two, ideally 1 year before you plan to submit. The administrative forms and your CV should be done months in advance to give you more time and less stress closer to the deadline. Please do not copy paste between B1 and B2. And ask for collegial review, at least of the B1. People are usually happy to read your B1. It's so short. When you've done all of this, I think you should take a 1 or 2 week break, ideally go on vacation, and then read your grant again. And submit early to learn the system. In the ERC portal, you can just submit and submit and submit, and it will only count your last submission. Because when you submit, you will find validation errors and you'll learn the system and all of this. So don't be shy. You can always retract it. And finally, maybe 3 days before the deadline, when you have your final version, I like to send it for linguistic proofreading by non-scientific native English speaker. Some universities offer this feature, otherwise there's ample opportunities to get this online. So Fiverr.com, for instance, is a website that does pretty good proofreading and it's not too expensive. So with that, I encourage you to visit the ERC website. All of this information is there and much more. And please reach out if you have any further questions. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Emma. It's really nice. I was jotting down my questions as you were talking, and then you were just answering them as you went along on the same wavelength. We have a few minutes to take some questions, though. So please raise your hand or please write in the chat. And while you are all thinking, I will start with a question for Emma. Something that you didn't mention directly, but might be good for people to know is, did you get support directly from a research grants or research funding office from your university?
I did. I did. And the first webinar or a seminar that I attended was at University College Dublin.
Okay.
They were very kind and they had like short kind of handout with advice where they just took you through all the steps and they had written advice on each step. And I found that extremely helpful in addition to the seminar. The second university where I actually ended up applying from was the University of Gothenburg, and they have a fantastic scientific office. And the person who helped me, she was called Ellen. I'm not sure if anyone is watching from Gothenburg, but she's now the head of the grant office. And she just had really, really fantastic support for me. So it's not always that they can advise you on the science of your project, but they can help you with so much more. And thirdly, what I would say is that I was able to get a lot of collegial advice. And that was not just from my university, but rather from my contact like net around the world. So this is kind of where you find out who's your true friend, who will read your proposal and not only say that it's so great, but like rather give you actual feedback, honest feedback, which can be hard to hear.
Yeah. It's another good reason to make sure you're building your network while you're a postdoc, right? So you have those really trustworthy colleagues later. Yeah.
And I used to also, now that I think about it, I used to, do you remember the experimental biology conferences? I used to always go to the postdoc sessions,
Oh, yeah,
and
okay.
there was like really good like kind of grant writing and like
Mhm.
networking and all of this. So throughout my postdoc, I spent a lot of time on that, and I was often advised that that was a waste of time. But in my opinion, it was really critical because you pick up a lot of tips and tricks.
Yes, good. Any questions from our audience, from our participants? I don't see anything showing up in the chat, so let me ask you one more question, which is a small practical one, and then we'll go to Ava, who I can see is raising her hand too. My small practical question is, in this granting scheme, are you allowed to suggest external reviewers?
You can definitely exclude, but
You can exclude.
to my recollection, you don't. But that's also why the keywords that you provide are so important because that's how the administrators find external reviewers. And I'm not sure if it's true for everyone, but I think a lot of colleagues that I've seen kind of jot them down like last minute, like 30 minutes before submission deadline and whatnot. Because, we're all busy and I understand that it's very hard, but it's good if you can think about that a little bit ahead of time so that you can kind of angle where your application goes,
Mm,
that a true expert finds it. Because otherwise, in my opinion, if an external reviewer receives a grant that is not entirely within their expertise, they will give like an okay review
yeah.
because nobody wants to really admit that they don't know. So
Mhm,
then they'll give it like an 8 out of a 10 or something like that. And
mhm,
that's not enough. So it's important that you have the right experts looking at your grant.
mhm. Yeah, keywords that are important too. Sometimes
Yeah.
we overlook or we look too quickly past
Yeah,
keywords
which is
that are.
all humans. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Ava, please tell us your question.
Yes, thanks a lot for this great talk and insight into the ERC. I was thinking or considering signing up as a reviewer, but I was wondering whether there's also too early to do that as I'm now entering my third year as a postdoc. And I was kind of starting it, but then I thought maybe I should wait a little longer and would like to get your point of
I
view on
think
that.
you should definitely do that. I learned an awful lot from reviewing. And let me think for a second, but I think I started reviewing for them like 2015 or something like that. I was not very senior.
Okay.
And they need people. And this is also, do you know, they have like between 3 and 12 external reviewers. You don't have to be like afraid. Like they have lots of people looking at the grants. So no, I think definitely sign up. And even so, you can sometimes, if you can reach out to a mentor, if you know that you have like a senior professor in your department that reviews, you can ask if you can be a co-reviewer, and if so, they will state that in their review that they had assistance or whatnot. And sometimes that can also be a way in. But yeah, sign them. I think that's great.
Okay.
Mhm.
Cool. Great. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Great. Thanks for the question, and thanks, Emma, for your talk and for taking all of our questions. I hope you can hang around during the next talk in case
I
something
will.
comes
I'm
up.
really looking forward to it.
Great. Excellent. So I am really happy to introduce our next speaker. And Gilles, I hope that I can say your last name correctly. So Gilles Claude Van Wallingham.
Yeah, that's close enough.
All right, I did okay. All right, good. In disclosure to everyone, Gilles and I know each other from previous work when I was in the Nordic EMBL partnership. Gilles is a team leader at Dendrite, which is one of the institutes in the Nordic EMBL partnership for molecular medicine. He's located at Aarhus University, and he works in neurobiology and genetics. And Gilles, if I remember right, you started your group about 2 years ago now, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
And prior to that, he held an EMBO fellowship at the University of Queensland, and that's where he got involved in zebrafish brain work and in optogenetics. And he's currently studying the microbiome, the gut microbiome, and the gut-brain axis, and especially how these interplay with the immune system. But importantly, and why he's here today, is that he was recently awarded an NNF Hollis Möller Emerging Investigator Grant. And from what I understand, the idea of this award for him is to be able to allow him to expand the setup of his independent research group. So Gilles, please tell us a bit more about your experience with this, and then we'll take some questions from the audience at the end.
All right, let me just get the screen shared, hopefully,
Yes.
if that works, maybe. All right, let's see. And now I share screen. Yeah, okay. Hopefully that works.
Yes, looks good.
Great. So thank you for the opportunity to kind of talk about this grant that I just got. So indeed, I'm at Aarhus University and I've had my group for about 2 years now. And so I kind of want to tell you a bit about my career, a little bit about the research project itself. But one of the important things to keep in mind really is that we're all trying to, get the money, but we know that the odds are not fantastic. So that's definitely something where you have to have a lot of resilience. You have to have the privilege to be able to fail. Because if you don't get the grant, you want to resubmit, and that's obviously requires the resilience and privilege to be able to do that. So one thing also to keep in mind before I start really into these things is the issue with success stories, because obviously we are here presenting what we did because we succeeded. And there is a definite survivorship bias. And it's also interesting to ask people who have failed why they failed. There is that very famous story from World War II where they were asking how to armor fighter planes so that they would come back and be able to fight again. And this is a very common thing that you probably have seen a lot, where this is each red dots are where the planes got hit, and they came back. And basically they were asked, where should we put the armor? And the first idea would be to put it around those red dots, right? But the planes that did not make it back are actually the ones where the red dots are not, because that means that they were shot down and the people died. So you actually miss some information when you focus only on these survivors that are coming back. So now that's out of the way. I'll briefly go back through my career, even though that's been described a little bit. So I did my PhD in Belgium, and I was lucky because I got 2 PhD fellowship. It still took 7 years. Many reasons for that, happy to discuss, but that's way too long. And then after that, I got this EMBO long-term fellowship to go to Australia. And the first time I actually failed at the interview, because EMBO fellowships are also something with a 2-tier system where you first apply and then you go to the interview, and then you've got a 50-50% chance of getting it. And I didn't get it the first time. Luckily, I got it the second time, and then I went in Australia, and I stayed there for 7 years, and I was utterly unsuccessful at getting any grants or fellowships in Australia. I tried a few times and that didn't work out. Luckily, I managed to finally get a job here in Denmark to start my own group. And so now I've been here for 2 years, and that's my first independent position in a tenure track, assistant professor and team leader at Dendrite. So with that in mind, that's basically why I applied to this Halas Möller emerging investigator from Novo Nordisk. So it's a great opportunity when you have a group to expand it, or potentially to start your own group. So the eligibility criteria have changed, but basically it's very much about if you have not yet an independent group position, or if you just have a group leader position, you can apply. So yeah, new or emerging group leaders, and it's a decent amount of money. So it's quite nice. And it's the same system as with the ERC or with EMBO. You apply, you send your proposal, and then you may or may not be invited for an interview. And if you make it to the interview, I think it's, again, maybe 50% or a third. And I didn't get it on the first try. So I tried the first time, didn't make it to the interview, and the second time I got it. I'm not sure. I changed the proposal quite a bit in between based on feedback, so I think that definitely helped. So my research project is based on the zebrafish. As was mentioned, that's one of the things that I learned in Australia, doing a lot of neuroscience and working on this gut-brain axis, because my PhD was in host pathogen interactions. And so I really want to bring my knowledge of neuroscience and my knowledge of host microbe interactions together. And so the idea is to look at what happens and the dysbiosis between the gut, the brain, and the immune system when the gut microbiota is affected. So for that, I use the fish. Many reasons for that. It's great because it develops externally. It's very cheap, so we get a lot of them. They have a vertebrate nervous system, so for a neuroscientist like me, it's great. They also have a conserved immune system, which is very important in this case because my proposal is focused on inflammation. And then you can do this really cool imaging, as you see at the bottom, where this is the gut of the fish, and each of the blinking dots you see are the neurons of the enteric nervous system. So these are the neurons of the second brain, the one that line up the gut, and that help regulate digestion, how the gut responds to microbes, the gut motility. And so you can monitor the gut motility, you can monitor the neuronal activity, and you can also look at the immune system. So overall, what I told them at the interview that I was going to do is really to kind of clarify all of these mechanisms of the gut-brain axis, which is very hyped at the moment, still a lot of studies to do. But here, because the animal is transparent, we can really use all of these fancy optical manipulation method to look at what's happening at the whole organism level, look at the bacteria within the gut, look at the gut motility and the enteric nervous system, look at the immune cells there in the top right, look at the brain of the fish, which is something that I've done a lot in Australia, where again, you can see blinking neurons throughout the whole brain. And of course, you can start doing some cool stuff also, although that's future things where you can look at the diet, the metabolism, you can do drug screens. And of course, it's always nice to say that you're going to mentor the next generation of scientists in using cutting edge methods. So that's something that I think a lot of funding agencies are also keen on seeing when you apply to these things. So that's definitely something that's important to mention, I think, when you apply. So also in this one, and I think the ERC maybe not as much because I think it's project related, but here they also really much want to see the research environment and basically show them why you're coming to Denmark, because for the non-Dane, and I guess for the Dane also, there is a little bit of small country syndrome, which is why the hell do people want to come to Denmark? And so showing them that you're really keen on establishing yourself in Denmark to improve the research environment here, that you have roots, that you have collaborators is really important for these Danish funding agencies. So also something to keep in mind. So how did I prepare? Indeed, as the previous speaker was mentioning, it's very important to use your network for feedback, because especially in Novo Nordisk or in these private foundations, their panel is usually fairly small. So they use external reviewers, but a lot of the people that are going to read your grants are not experts. And that's the first hurdle to pass, is convincing them that your research is really cool. And so if you have a research network, use them to get feedback and start really early, because it takes a lot of time to write a good application, especially the first one. And you will have to iterate, you will have to change things. So you need to give yourself the time to do that, and potentially to realize that your idea is not fantastic and that you need to change everything. So start early. And it feels very wasteful, but I think at the end of the day, you can reuse a lot of these things. So it's very important, if you want to become a group leader, to start this process as early as possible. As I mentioned, in some of these panels, and it depends a lot, again, the Danish grants are a bit different, but here, for example, my interview was in front of non-experts. So I got to present my project, and I think there were about 14 people, and there were 2 people that had like semi-relevant expertise. So really not super experts on your domain, and you need to convince all of the people. So it's very important, at least for the Harris Möller, to get also feedback from non-experts, because they will have to understand your project. And I used overview figures, like very simple figures, usually made in BioRender or something like that, because because these people are not all experts, having something fairly simple that they can understand at that abstract level is very, very important. So don't lose yourself too much into super details kind of things. So because I made it to the interview, I was lucky because we have a great research support office here in Aarhus, and they provided a lot of help, including feedback on my proposal, on the budget, but especially a lot of preparation for the interview. So I had several mock interviews with the research support office, where there was one member of the research support office, there was a previous recipient of the Halles Möller, and then there was someone that had sat on the panel of Novo Nordisk, and so had kind of an inside idea of what was happening. And here you see the dates of the different presentation, and that's it took me a few trials to end with my final version before my interview. So I also had a mock interview within the department. So our department has its own internal review. So I got feedback on the proposal, and then the members of the research committee also sat onto my interview and helped me with identifying the problems in how I was presenting the things. I asked my wife to give her some interviews because, again, because it's non-experts that are looking at it, I wanted to be sure that even someone that is vaguely aware, because she had to sit through many explanations of my research, kind of, does it make sense, and can someone that is not an expert understand the flow and the logic behind it, and also what are the issues in how I was speaking, because this interview is 10 minutes, so you need to be very sharp, you need to be very precise, and you need to convince and hook people. And then a colleague that also gave me some advice on the thing. So I did many mock interviews and corrected a few things, and that again takes time. Well, you see, it took about 2 weeks of prep about this interview because the timeline you get is very short, and then you have this 10-minute interview that decides kind of the rest of your career. So it's a bit stressful, but I think in the end it worked out. So why did they choose me? That's an excellent question. I think there is a big part of luck, which should be acknowledged a lot. And of course, I'm lucky that I present well, so that helps a lot, especially when you speak to non-experts. If you can be convincing, if you can sound confident, if you can appear good, then people will respond very well to that. I think in other parts, in other panels where the project is maybe more central, being a good presenter may not be as important, but I think in this scheme, that's a very, very big advantage. I also had already starting grants and an interdisciplinary grant, so they knew that I had money and I had the means to actually start what I was promising. So for the feasibility aspect, I think that helped a lot. And I already had shown independence, I had co-corresponding author papers, I had a last author review. I supervised students when I was in Australia because I was a senior postdoc, and so helping a lot with those things. So that shows also that I was ready to be independent. And I had, of course, team leader as Dendrite. I'm the chair of the Lundbeck-Fonden Investigator Network. I have a strong international network. So all of these showed that I was ready to be independent. And that's something that you can, to some extent, build already if you can help supervising students and these kind of things. And in terms of metrics, I had about H-index of 15 with about 1,000 citations when I had the interview. So that's kind of what happened, but one of the other grantee was much more junior. And of course, I think he had his Nature paper published 2 or 3 days before the interview, which definitely helps. So they do look at these kind of things. But when he applied and got selected, it was only a preprint. So in general, for grant applications in Denmark, and I think for grant applications in general, the first grant is the hardest. And on the left here, you'll see this is the status of a lot of my grants, and a lot of them got rejected. So I made the last time I looked at it, I was at about a 20% success rate, which is a bit higher than the average. But I apply to a lot of grants, and that's something that's very important to keep in mind, because we know the success rates are bad. We know that even if you have a good project, it may not end up being funded. There is not enough funding for all the good ideas. So applying with good projects to many, many different things hopefully will lead you to start getting grants. And the first one to write, of course, is the hardest, because then you can reuse some of it. So recycling and reusing those grants is very important. So if you apply with the same project to multiple things, that's not ideal, but there are a lot of parts that can be reused and recycled. So the first one is hard and every subsequent one is slightly easier, especially in Denmark where the applications are small-ish. Very important, again, in the Danish funding schemes, I think, these private funders want things that are very precise. Usually you need to explain your research in a very, very small format. So you need to be simple and you need to be clear on what you want to do. So they don't especially always want super precise methods and things like that, but they want to see that you have a clear vision of where you're headed. And again, there was talk about proofreading. I think that's a great idea. If you're not a native English speaker, you can also use some of these machine learned text tools to help. There are some that are more specific to science. Interestingly, ChatGPT, for example, because it has access to all the NIH grants, outputs very decent grants. And I know several colleagues that are using that to fill some of the more boring parts, like for the scientific impact or a lot of these things. More and more researchers are using those ChatGPT kind of approaches to help with that. So I'm not advocating to use it. I'm just saying it's an option, and I know people that have done it, and I know some that have been successful with that. So random tips and thoughts about my career and what I've had experienced. As I said, resilience, being able to go through a lot of these failures is important. And the fact that you can have a job at the end of the day is definitely a big plus. Have a clear research vision that you can sell again and again and again, because people will see that you know where you are going. And I think in a lot of these career grants, that's very important to see that you're not just doing like a project grant, or you're not just a postdoc anymore that's doing that one project, but you want to get somewhere. And I think this clear vision really can help and will also make writing your own proposal easier. You need to expect failure, and the big thing is, of course, that we live in a system that's basically the winner gets all and the richer gets richer. So if you have initial wins, and that's been shown again and again for getting a job and others, if you have one of these Marie Curie and EMBO fellowship, that's one thing on your CV that will help getting the next grant and so on. And also you need to have an exit plan. That's when I got this position, before I got it, I had put myself a deadline to when I would leave science, and I knew what I would do. And that removes a lot of the stress. So yeah, you just need to, embrace the fact that a lot of it is out of your control and apply to everything. And yeah, so thank you for your attention. For the funding agency, my lab, the picture is not up to date. We need to make a new one, but especially Rajlakshmi, that's my first PhD student that has followed me from Australia. And of course, the support of Aarhus University for getting these grants, and my collaborators here. And I think that's it for my time. I have a few more thoughts about how useful these kind of ranking of grants are, because there are a lot of studies that show that actually ranking grants does not increase really the impact of the research, but that's an entirely separate topic, but happy to discuss that if you want.
That's great. Thank you so much, Gilles, for a fantastic talk and bringing up lots and lots of really specific points that people should be thinking about, and not acknowledging that this is not an easy task. I think that's one of the key messages. I have a bunch of questions, but I would also like to see if there are questions from our audience. If anybody has, please turn on your screen, turn on your video, raise your hand, or write in the chat. All right, while you are thinking, then I will begin along with mine. Gilles, you made a really important point in the beginning and a few times throughout that learning from our failures is extremely important. And I would love to have a seminar series next, perhaps following this one, on stories of failure in grant writing. But can you tell us just one or two things, concrete things that you learned from your failures? How did you turn those into successes?
So I think, especially coming from Australia, where these grants in Australia are stupidly large, Like they ask you for insane amount of details for very, very low success rates. And coming here to Denmark, where the grant format is much shorter, I got trapped into focusing way too much on the finicky details, you know, trying to sell the methods, trying to say, you know, the science, putting actually the impact of the science a bit on the back, because I wanted people to see, yeah, I can do all of these cool things, and you should give me money to do cool things, instead of why what I was doing was important. And as I progressed here and applied to more and more grants, my grants became simpler and simpler with time, with more focus on what I was hoping to accomplish than how I was going to accomplish it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does. And fantastic point. Do you think that you picked that up just from the iterations yourself, or did you also get advice from colleagues? So what role did your colleagues, did your network help in shaping?
So I think I'm really lucky that the department is extremely supportive here, and so we get feedback from a lot of the more senior researchers here, and so that's something that they kind of hammered repeatedly. But also, research support office is great, and so I got this feedback, and then I got also a little bit of feedback from the funding agencies. Also, although that's very, I think Lundbeck is working on it, but that's one of the issues, is that you don't get a lot of feedback from the funding agencies. And so it's mostly from my colleagues here, I think, that I got that. And the fact that then I started becoming more successful when I applied.
Yeah, that feedback from the funding agencies, that's very different than what Emma was talking about in getting feedback from the ERC proposal.
Yes.
I don't see any questions popping up yet, so I'm going to go on to my next one. And that is, you talked about starting early. How early for this particular? I mean, can you give a bit of a time?
I mean, it's something to keep in mind is that at best, in the best case scenario, you have your grants a year after you apply, right? So you need to have a buffer of at minimum 1 or 2 years. And that's being extremely optimistic on your chances. So I think there is not really too early. You need to be lucky enough that your supervisor, when you're a postdoc, allows you the space to do that, of course. But I think that that's getting really, really into that and into the mindset of thinking about your idea, refining it, can take a lot of time, especially the first time. So I don't think you can be too early for any of these things.
That's great advice. And it also sounds like it's a very continuous process. It doesn't end.
Yeah. Oh, no. I mean, once you start your lab, you're in the rat race. You can never stop.
That's right. It's 4 o'clock, so I would like to ask one final question. And that's great, Emma, you have your hand up, because my question is actually for both of you. Let's take Emma's question first, and then I will ask you both my final question.
I just wanted to say how much I enjoyed this talk. I thought it was a really nice intermix of different aspects that I can only agree with. And I just wanted to say that I agree how important it is with the failures. And I don't think we talk about that enough. I have a similar list to yours, just to keep track. And I look back at the year that I applied and got the ERC, and I applied for 18 grants that year, and I got 4. Wow. And I was like, you know, like I always apply for a lot, and it takes so much time and effort. And people say that it's not worth it because it takes too much time. But you reuse your ideas, even if it's not the same grants, like aspects are the same, and you rework it in your head. And I find also that it helps to shape your research focus of your lab, and like it helps me think. So I think it's never a waste of time. I just wanted to thank you basically for bringing that up.
Good. Thanks. Maybe we need to follow up on the failure idea. Maybe there's one more webinar yet to come in this series. My final question for both of you is just to please leave our audience with one key piece of advice. What is your one main takeaway? And we will start with Gilles.
All right. No pressure. I think my one piece of advice is to find the one topic that you really love and that you see yourself work for the next 10 years, because this is a tough job and you need to be passionate about what you do and you need to be interested. If you start trying to follow trends like, gut-brain axis is big, no, I'm going to write a grant on the gut-brain axis, it will, I think people will read that you're just following the trends, and that's never going to be your identity and your vision and your research. And so that's very important to build that your brand in a sense.
Very nice. Thank you. And Emma?
Oh, at least I had 10 seconds to think here. I feel like it was a benefit. No, but I can only agree with Jules. But in addition, then if I try and think, I think that the most important thing for me, at least, is not to give up. I don't know why, and I'm not sure. It would be very interesting to hear if anyone else shares this experience. But I think in general, in the scientific community, when you talk about grants, the atmosphere often becomes a little bit hard, like a little bit negative, like it's impossible, and all of that kind of jazz. And if I were to give one advice, it would be to just kind of close your ears to that and shoot for the moon and go for your dreams, because obviously people get these grants. Like, yes, it's a lot of work and you should be prepared, and you shouldn't think that it's not hard. It is hard, but everything is hard. And you get better at it. You just apply and then you see how it goes, and try and be open and receptive to the feedback. And you have to want to hear the feedback, because nobody's perfect from the beginning. But then I would say just go for it and try and keep a positive attitude. Like, you have to have a certain level of blindness to the failure, because otherwise, yeah, just keep going.
Well, thank you. Such motivational advice, such good advice from both of you. So I want to end our session for today by saying thank you first to Emma and to Gilles for spending their time with us, for sharing their expertise, and also for sharing their experience with us too, because it is so much about an individual's experience that will help guide us. And then I also want to thank the audience, for all of you who were here, for your interest and for the couple of questions that we had from you. And I want to wish you all really good luck in your grant writing. I saw one hand pop up there at the end, perhaps. So if there is a question, then please hang around for a minute. And Emma and Gilles, if you can hang around just for 1-2 more minutes, we'll see if there are any questions. Thank you all for being here.